From the arena to the front office, this is Scoreboard. I'm Chris Titley, and each episode brings you stories from the game of sport, where mindset, money, and meaning shape what comes next. Athletes, coaches, owners, and business leaders unpack the moments that matter, because the Scoreboard isn't just about winning, it's about life beyond the game. Now let's get to this week's episode.
Hi, it's Chris Titley, and on today's episode of Scoreboard, the podcast, I'm joined by Alistair Dobson, the Executive General Manager of the Big Bash Leagues at Cricket Australia. Alistair, thank you so much for being part of this series.
G'day, Chris. Thanks for having me on.
Alistair, before we get into the Big Bash, we're sitting here on the Friday, the 9th of May. How's your Friday started?
My Friday started pretty well. It's the time of year for us where you've got a bit of time on your hands, not a lot. There's lots going on, planning for the coming season review. So I guess a bit of that time of year where you're making up time that you lost over the summer. So lots of kids drop off at school and all those things. But lots of really big meetings and important sessions coming up over the next few weeks that we're deep in planning for because, the summer's not far away.
And your role as Executive General Manager of the Big Bash Leagues, you want to give the listeners out there a bit of an understanding of what that is? Yeah,
so the Big Bash Leagues is two leagues, the BBL being our men's comp and the WBBL is our women's league. My role is managing and administrating and growing and planning around both those competitions. So from on the field, player contracting, recruiting, supporting our clubs, right through to off field around selling tickets and growing the popularity and putting on great events that we've been doing so well for 15 years now. So it's a really exciting job. I reckon it's one of the best jobs in Australian sport. Everyone loves the Big Bash. It always puts a smile on people's faces, and to be involved in something like that is pretty cool.
And you've been at Cricket Australia for sort of roughly circa 4 years or so, but prior to that, you're with another iconic game in Australia, the AFL. Can you talk about your background and what led you to cricket?
Yeah, I think my background, if you like, has always been in leagues and clubs as a rule. So certainly a career in sport, but not a lot of expertise on the field or in sort of ownership and those sort of things. Very much so more in working for clubs and leagues. So I started my career at the Melbourne Footy Club, and then 14 odd years at the AFL in a whole range of roles there, primarily on sort of a commercial and strategy side, and then now actually a bit over 5 years now at Cricket Australia in this role. So all through that has been, I guess, a role attached to how do we grow clubs on the field, grow clubs off the field, but also create ecosystems, if you like, where everyone can thrive and be successful.
And Alistair, going back to when you were appointed, can you look back now and go, what was the league like then and where the league is now, and sort of give an understanding of where things have changed and how they've changed?
Yeah, it's the story or the narrative of the Big Bash is fascinating in a sense of a sports league. So, obviously everyone would remember the early days, the first, let's call it 5 or 6, 7 years of the of the BBL that exploded and I think really changed the way sport in Australia was watched and presented and took off really quickly. Then there was a period there of, I guess, expansion of the number of games and a different looking season and perhaps some some growing pains that we sort of talk about them in those years, and then obviously hit by a couple of years of COVID. So I came in 2019, so just prior to 2 seasons of COVID. Lots of growing pains there around the games we put on and the tickets we sold. So it needed a bit of work at that point. There was still a lot of passion and belief in the BBL within cricket. Perhaps there wasn't as much belief in it outside our industry, and that was a big part of what we spent the last 5 or 6 years trying to grow and demonstrate this is an incredible league, both our men's and women's leagues, and have again risen back up to being kind of that iconic summer sports league that dominates over the Australian summer, and it's been a pretty rewarding journey to come to be here and sort of be part of, I guess, a resurgence of the Big Bash that everyone believed in.
Curious to know about some of those growing pains and how you got that feedback, I suppose, the test and learn, or make a little change here and people go, oh, I don't like that, and how long it takes to kind of get that feedback to make an iteration?
Yeah, I think the feedback, and particularly in something as popular and public and I guess front of mind like cricket, you don't have to look too far to get feedback, and whether that's from fans or players, in our broadcast partners, sponsors, it's everyone's watching and everyone has a view, which is awesome. The passion behind it. So the feedback was pretty consistent in the sense that the number of games we played and the I guess the opportunity to continue to put on an innovative, exciting, entertaining proposition for kids and families over summer was probably had lost a bit of its razor sharp edge that it had in the first 6 or 7 years, and that's natural in as any product matures. There's certainly no great mistake made there. It was just the natural growing pains, as I said. So the feedback came as raw as crowd numbers, and then behind the scenes in terms of conversations we're having with all our stakeholders, players, clubs, broadcasts, and others that said that we might need to sort of sharpen up a few things here and get it back on track, which we feel like we've done.
And 2019, yes, social media was prominent. Yes, TikTok and short clips were prominent, and things like KO Minis probably weren't as prominent. But now we're sitting here in 2025. We've got an era of consumption on content on a little device called a mobile phone that people use, and they want to see highlights, etc. How important has that been in terms of leveraging your growth, I suppose, as opportunities, but also threats?
Oh, clearly big. I mean, ultimately, the Big Bash, and I think Australian cricket is still so fortunate to have the mass reach and mass coverage that we get through our free-to-air and free-to-air partner in Seven, and obviously Fox as well, and through KO. So still the majority of people kind of consume our leagues through the I guess the traditional way there. But certainly, and cricket's so set up so beautifully for the short form content with highlights of sixes and wickets and catches and run outs. So that's been a big part of it. I think Cricket Australia is rightly proud of the digital network we have. Great apps, great content, and we've spent a lot of the last couple of years in a Big Bash sense of catching up a bit on that. We launched our own app only 18 months ago. Dedicated resources to provide great content, and almost sort of stand aside from the traditional Cricket Australia content that sits on the Cricket Live app, and that's deliberate because we still primarily love to focus on the younger demographic and perhaps newer audiences into the game who want to come in and experience cricket for the first time. So that gives us permission to do things a bit differently from a content perspective as well.
And with the different product in cricket, let's use Test cricket versus BBL as an example and come to the grassroots level of playing cricket per se. What's the involvement there from the BBL at a grassroots level versus just the traditional kind of Cricket Australia umbrella?
Yeah, it's embedded right back to the very birth of the Big Bash, in the sense that one of the founding reasons it was created was to connect the younger fans, if you like, or future participants into the game. And so at the very heart of our proposition is kids coming and enjoying the game, having fun. You go to a Big Bash game, men's or women's, you're going to see a heap of kids in the crowd. And what our network's done, particularly our state associations and Big Bash clubs, have then been able to bridge that right down into programs. So if you're a Woolworths Cricket Blast participant, in your pack you're getting a Sydney Sixers or a Perth Scorchers coloured apparel in your pack, and tickets and all those obvious things we do. And our clubs do a fantastic job of connecting right through the line. And it's made easier by the fact that our product is specifically designed for that audience. So it's a pretty natural synergy there.
I was going to say, like, from a 2020 point of view, what do you think makes a good 2020 game experience and the product itself for it to continue for the next 10 years?
Yeah, I think, again, the T20 journey is a bit like the BBL one, isn't it? Where, perhaps 15 years ago it was seen as maybe not as legitimate form of the game as other formats. But certainly, you look around the world now and it's as serious and as professional and as elite as any other format. In fact, in some instances, it's even more serious and more sheep stations type competitions, and that's matched by the sophistication and the legitimacy that you need to put on a league. So we've been, part of our evolution has been maintaining all the things that made it great early days, whether that's fireworks and music and bucket heads and lots of catches in the crowd and all those fun things that people love about coming to a BBL or a T20 game, but making sure we continue to evolve for the more, I guess, authentic or hardcore cricket fan that still wants to see great cricket. So to be able to have the right on-field conditions, fast, hard wickets, fast outfields that produce high scores, great fielding is really important, as well as making sure we connect in an increasingly competitive market around the world with the right players. So, gone are the days where the BBL is the only option for players at any time to come and play in a T20 league. There's now so many options around the world, whether it's in our window or otherwise. And for us, to connect with agents and players around the world is an increasingly important part of the dynamic. So it's been a key part of that evolution, I think.
Just touching on that in regards to the window of opportunity the Big Bash has kind of created around the summer of Australia. How hard is that to be protected, I suppose, with other schedules, and you've got new leagues popping up and you've got professional players playing multiple leagues? What can you do, or what have you done to kind of protect that window?
Yeah, it's probably the most commonly asked question, if not the most pressing issue that I think cricket has generally, and it's not. It's not hard to find articles on the complexities of cricket scheduling globally and the like, and we're certainly not immune to that. And I think there's options and competition within our window, and partly the history of the Big Bash has been competing with other content from day one, and primarily our own international summers, where the Australian cricket model is a test match during the day and Big Bash at night, and that creates incredible kind of connection between all our content and an opportunity for people to watch. But it does mean that we often have not all the best Australian players playing in the BBL. And we found a nice, I think historically, had a really nice connection there, or ability to leverage off the two. So it's not a new territory for us to have to put on and run great cricket leagues without the best players. But you're right, it's the market at the moment around the world is incredibly dynamic and increasingly challenging for us. And we have to continue to rely on the things that make Australian cricket great, with great stadiums, great surfaces, big crowds, all the environmental conditions and safety and security that you would want to come and play in Australia. We still leverage that really hard, as well as being competitive on a salary front.
Yeah, just on that competition, Test cricket. I mean, where do you see Test cricket? And I'm not saying about the game itself. I'm saying as like a competition to Big Bash, or is it a complementary? You mentioned watching the Test and watching Big Bash. There's nothing better than cricket all day, right? But then obviously, if Test cricket starts to fall a little bit or wane a little bit, and we haven't seen that recently. The last series is unbelievable. But more broadly speaking, how does that balance and affect potentially the Big Bash numbers?
Yeah, it feels like it's a key topic, doesn't it, around world cricket at the moment. What I would say is Test cricket's still so popular in Australia, whether you only have to look back to last summer, Australia, India, and imagine what this summer is going to be like with an Ashes summer out here. And, so I think we're still so fortunate and, so strong because we have a really strong team and we put on great events, and other countries love coming and playing Australia. It's the ultimate challenge, right, to come out to Australia and try and beat the Australian team in a Test series. So that doesn't show too many signs of dropping off any time soon. That said, you can clearly see the dynamics around the world are a little different, with Test cricket becoming perhaps less, I guess, viable in some instances. But for us, it's a model that's working. Last summer was one of our biggest Big Bash summers ever, because we had a great season, but also, you'd be crazy not to think that the momentum from the Australia-India series didn't push into the BBL season. So,
yeah, as cricket as a whole, as you mentioned, like the good cricket equals more excitement, means people are on eyeballs no matter what. I suppose a quote-unquote one-sided series might not, people it's cricket, I'm done. I've done my cricket for the day and we won, yay,
Correct, yeah. So it's it's something that we were always looking at. It's scheduling in cricket's probably the hardest part of the game, to be honest.
Now, and you mentioned before about taking kids to have that game day experience. I've spoken a lot to some basketball executives. I had the Jack Jumper CEO recently, the Bullets experience. The basketball game day experience is lights, music, action continuing. What are you doing at a game day experience, I suppose, and what are clubs doing that they're experimenting? Can they come and say, we want to do this? And you're like, oh, not a bad idea, but, etc. How much freedom do each club get on their game day experience?
Yeah, great freedom. I mean, I think our clubs are super innovative around that. We're coming off a high base, so part of our challenge is being able to maintain what we think is a market-leading position around the event experience. And when you come to, we still like, I think when you come to a Big Bash game, it's the best you can get in terms of that event experience. I think where our clubs are continuing to innovate is about creating new moments in the season. We've we play, if I talk about our men's comp, a 40-game season, so each team has 5 home games, which is not many opportunities to put on a show. So it's definitely a quality over quantity play for our clubs. They have 5 opportunities to put on a show, and they're increasingly looking how can they make each of those 5 events into something unique and special. So, obviously the I guess the leader there is the Adelaide Strikers on their New Year's Eve game, which has become so iconic. The way the Melbourne Stars are continuing to build their derby game at the MCG against the Renegades. So the innovation is coming as much around creating, unique moments or unique themes and opportunities around each of their 5 home games, while trying to maintain that, such a high base level of great fireworks, great music, really strong integration into the game, and clearly underpinned by great T20 cricket, which is still, high scores and close games is kind of how we measure the on-field product as well.
Yeah, the close games is an interesting one because in 2020 there is a possibility it cannot be a close game, and people have witnessed games where the teams get rolled for 60 and the other team gets them in 4 overs, etc. I mean, it must be a bit of like a sigh feeling when these games happens, but it's natural. It's part of the game. How do you? I mean, there's drafts and things in the NBA. You finish last, you get the top draft pick, etc. How do you kind of balance that up? And I've got a bit of a theory on this as well. I mean, four different winners in 5 years. AFL, again, I think it's 5 different winners in 5 years, and NBA, etc. It's tight. It's not one team dominates all potentially. And let's say rugby union, the Bledisloe Cup, the last 20 odd years, and even to rugby league to a degree with the Penrith Panthers. Like, what's your view on that?
Competitive balance is at the heart of any league's viability. To almost go against my previous point, you can put on the greatest fireworks and the best music and the best, sponsored promotion you like. If you don't have competitive balance and jeopardy in the competition, that's largely all for nothing. We track it in 3 ways. It's obviously the closeness of a game, the closeness of a season, and then I guess the closeness across seasons. So can anyone win any game? Does every game still count in a season? And then, to your point, 4 winners in 5 seasons. We would love 8 winners in 8 seasons. That's kind of the perfect competitive balance model. We feel like we're in pretty good shape there. I think we track closeness of games in that sense. Last season, all 40 games were live in our men's comp. Went down to the last over of the last game, and from an administrator's point of view, that's a dream result. And what can we do about it? Obviously, there's always an element of competitive balance in T20. To your point, it's got an element of luck in it. You have one player gets a hold of a bowling lineup and can change the game. But there's obviously we have all the traditional competitive balance metrics like primarily salary caps and list sizes and then some mechanics within it around an overseas player draft and sort of different player salary thresholds and some complication around that. And then we like any league, you're always trying to use whatever mechanisms you can to make games closer. We have tried things like, I think the power surge is a rule innovation that we've brought in the last 3 or 4 years, and partly it's because we think it's great that you can have a moment in the game that everyone can talk about in the middle of the game, but also part of it is designed to give teams that that are out of a game a chance to get back into a game. There's definitely a competitive balance element to some of our rule innovations, which is if you feel like you're out of a game, you've got an opportunity to get back into it, which is ultimately about driving a closer last ball finish.
This is your moment to shine, Alistair, the power surge. Was that your idea and the fly on the wall in terms of the meeting of rule changes? How does that, who comes up with them?
Oh, no, I won't claim all the credit. It was certainly a small group. Cricket's got such a history of innovating its formats, right? We never really sit still, and we're now playing, the 100 in the UK is such a great innovative format as well. So, yeah, you're sitting around. We generally, when we think about rule changes, it's either higher scores, closer games, or kind of relevant strategy. We avoid innovations in that sense that are just sort of novelties or gimmicks. And so while some of them might appear that way on face value, they're all designed to either, as I said, higher scores, closer games, or strategy. And the power surge, from our perspective, ticked all 3 of those. When you take it, who takes it, how you execute, all those sort of things. So it's we would start every year with 10 or 15 ideas, and one of the luxuries of the Big Bash is we're not beholden to ICC regulations. We can largely do whatever we want, albeit we're still pretty, we still want to stick pretty closely to to the regular T20 format. And so you whittle those down by going through those filters, and then clearly heaps of consultation with players, clubs, broadcasters. It affects, rule changes that affect list management strategies, and those sort of things need to be treated really sensitively and really with lots of collaboration and consultation. So, it's a really interesting and fun part of the job, is to seek ideas and find the good ones.
I get that it is a sensitive topic, obviously, because there's lots of dollars and lots of things involved and stakeholders, etc. But I need to know some of these ideas that didn't come through potentially, or are they up your sleeve that maybe they'll come and eventually you're like, oh, we're a bit too early on this idea, or maybe not?
Oh, look, they're often we borrow from other sports. Things like a designated hitter, for example, where a player can just come in and only has to bat. You can see in the IPL they have an impact player now, where effectively you can pick a batting 11 and a bowling 11, and that's seen the scores in the IPL go through the roof. Lots of innovations in that sense. Different penalties for a maiden over. Different rewards for a batter, but batting at a certain strike rate. If a six goes 100 metres, do you get more than six? All those kind of interesting things which probably don't make it past too many fielders. But at the heart of all those ideas is a real sense of innovation, and those ideas come from players, they come from our coaches, they come from our broadcasters. So everyone certainly feels like they have permission to offer ideas, which is great.
Are you going to bring back the old Mercantile Mutual sign for $100,000? The Steve Waugh hit it, and I think it was Shane Lee maybe hit it as well back in the day.
It's amazing how often I get asked that question. The answer is there's definitely merit in it. It's if we could find a way to get that done without taking too many seats out, we might. But it's a cool idea because it's doesn't really, it's a good example. It doesn't really impact the game. It's a great way for fans to connect and have a bit of fun, and it would create some interesting moments.
Yeah, no, for sure. I'm also curious, I suppose, looking at other sports, and you mentioned looking at other sports and other leagues. How much of your time is looking at that and going, actually, that's not the worst idea?
Yeah, a lot, both in terms of how they're run from a governance and on the boring stuff. How do their businesses work? And we spend a lot of time on that. Different models from the NFL to the AFL to the IPL. They've all got amazing differences and strengths there. And then the on-field around. We watch a lot lately what the MLB have been able to do in terms of shortening the length of games, and they've been able to, which is an issue for cricket, over rates and length of games. And one of the core things for us is a family-friendly product that's done and dusted in hopefully close to 3 hours. We see that's getting harder and harder as the game gets more strategic and there's more professionalism and more on the line. The games can blow out, but yeah, we've been studying the MLB pretty closely. They've been able to significantly reduce the length of their games, which were blowing out, by different use of shot clocks and game clocks and those sort of things. So that's been a really interesting one, and we've had a crack at a couple of those. And it has had some impact, but yeah, we're doing a lot of work on the length of matches and how we might be able to at least sort of contain the blowouts at the moment.
I remember early on in the Big Bash, and even 2020 as a format, people sort of were relating to it as baseball, like going, oh, it's a baseball version of cricket, etc. And you're talking about higher scores. Have you seen the higher scores go up, and how far can they go before people get a bit tapped out and go, it's just baseball style?
Yeah, there's definitely that risk that it just becomes they become too high, because the reality is it's really hard to chase down 220, and ultimately there's a sweet spot for a T20 game of let's say 170 to 190. Then you're going to get a good chase, but it's not going to be too hard. So I think so our scoring rates go up gradually, but they fluctuate because at the same time you've got the strategy behind bowling and the amount of data and analytics that goes into a game now, and you may or may not be surprised, but around how much there's a view that T20 is just the bowler bowls it and the batter tries to hit a six. There's so much data and analytics. It's a fascinating part of the game that we should probably do a better job of bringing to life for the fans, because the amount of analytics that goes into every batter's scoring zones and weaker zones and where the bowler misses and all those types of things is fascinating. So I think for every innovation that we might bring in to try and bring scoring up, the teams and the bowlers and the coaches are getting equally as sophisticated around trying to control it, which is the sweet spot for sport, right? Like you always want that tension between, and it would be no different in an AFL environment where the AFL wants scores to go up and coaches want scores to come down because coaches are inherently sort of slightly more conservative or like to win on defense. So, and I reckon that's where you get the best innovation, when you've got that really healthy conflict between rule changes for one purpose and the coaches and the players trying to almost kind of outgame that. And we see that pretty live as well.
You touched on the AFL then, and you've got the AFL as a product here. It's not a global game per se, but then you've got the flagship product, which is the AFL final, which is in Melbourne every year, barring COVID, which is in Brisbane and a few things like that. Then you've got things like rugby league where you've got the season, but you've got the middle of the season, you've got the State of Origin, another product, which is like bang, it's like a little side thing. You've got the NBA where you've this year or the last couple of years have introduced the in-season cup. They've also introduced the play-in, things like that. In terms of like a different product outside the BBL, is that possible? I think State of Origin style or something like that?
Yeah, for sure. We're always looking at ways that we might, all-star games and those things. I think to a degree cricket has that covered because you just naturally have an international series alongside the BBL, alongside, women's international and the WBBL. So, trying to add new content within content or formats within format is perhaps not as relevant from a cricket perspective. I get if you're a one format sport or code like the AFL or NBA, you can sort of see you're trying to add a bit of light and shade or a bit of variability in there. It kind of exists to a degree already in cricket, which is probably why it's so popular, and its strength is you can sit down for 5 days and watch a test match, or you can sit down with your kids for 3 hours on the Boxing Day night and
New Year's Eve, yeah.
Yeah, correct.
You mentioned before about the players and obviously the impact from the players. And as a kid, I remember watching these iconic teams and knowing the names of players and having their trading cards and posters on the wall. And that's still to this day in sport. Now you've got the Instagram generation where players are generating their own content as well, and people are following them when they're having coffees, and people are following them when they're at the gym, etc. How important do you monitor that in terms of content of players and visibility of players to make them icons, to make them sign autographs and selfies, and people go, I want to go see this player?
Yeah, it's clearly from a global sport perspective, it's that ongoing. Maybe it's a shift towards the player, but it's certainly the growth of the player brand, and I think cricket's done that as well as anyone. I think it's an interesting dynamic from a T20 league perspective, because the players that play in the BBL also play generally in 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 other leagues around the world. So it's as much around helping our fans keep track of Glenn Maxwell's 12-month calendar, not just the 6 weeks he's playing for the Melbourne Stars, and whether he's a local that comes back into Australia or an overseas player that comes into Australia for 8 weeks every summer. So it's a slightly different dynamic for us around the player that is perhaps a bit more, mobile around the world. And so we have to work a little bit harder to make sure that when Sam Billings turns back up for the Sydney Thunder this year for the 2nd or 3rd or 4th year, that all the Sydney Thunder fans know what he's done for the last 6 months while he's been away, and how great his season's been, and how he's still such a great player.
Yeah, and then the actual BBL content, and the AFL seem to do it on their YouTube channels, etc. Quizzes, getting the players involved. The kids watch it. It's sort of like, oh wow, little fun, little interactions. How's the BBL gone around that, including the players part of the league?
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's even more important because you have such a short window, as I said, where a player sort of lands back into their BBL or WBBL environment. We've got to play catch up pretty quick. That don't forget. Do you remember? Mitch Owen, who had such an amazing finish to last year for the Hurricanes. There'll be a heap of Hurricanes fans around the world and particularly around Tasmania, that will need to catch up on what he's been up to. So that's super important for us.
And let's talk the business of sport for a second. I assume 100% of the Big Bash is owned by Cricket Australia, yet in some other leagues you're seeing teams start to to be sold off, or private equity coming involved. And you've seen the Jack Jumpers recently in the NBA, NBL being acquired by a private equity group. There must be interested parties per se, and I'm not open to sort of, you don't need to share any sensitive stuff, but the view on Cricket Australia to hold this asset.
Yeah, it's such a. I feel like we've covered some pretty meaty topics already, right? It's a pretty fascinating time in that sense. Clearly, the BBL's now, from what we can see, kind of the last remaining league to be centrally owned. The 100 have recently, or are currently completing a transaction for their teams to be partially privately owned, which has been a fascinating one for us to follow as well. And we're still in a position where all 8 teams are effectively owned by Cricket Australia and licensed out to our state associations to run and manage and commercialise those teams. Feels like the market's pretty hot. There's lots of big numbers thrown around, whether it's for cricket or other sports in the UK or in the US or in other markets. It's one of those ones where it comes up regularly from day one, even before the BBL. You don't have to dig too far to find articles from the very start of the Big Bash when it was discussed around whether a team or two or all the teams should include private investment. So it's not like it's something that we've never thought of and continue to look at. And for us, it's just about understanding we're in a really strong position. We have a profitable league that is really popular, has a huge fan base, delivers big crowds and huge TV audiences. So it's not you're not looking to solve an immediate obvious problem, but so that's an important perspective. What are you trying to solve, and what are the outcomes you want from any kind of change in ownership? And for us right now, we've got a really strong league, and we've got all our clubs in good shape, and Cricket Australia and our state associations are all aligned in the future of the Big Bash. You never say never, obviously, because it's a dynamic market and the world's changing, but it's been a pretty successful model so far, that's for sure.
Yeah, and we're coming up to 10 years on the WBBL as well. And I suppose in regards to other leagues around the world, the WNBA kicked off last year in terms of like just the rise in interest. Are you looking at other leagues, women's leagues around the world, and looking at what they're doing as well to continue to make sure that there's momentum in women's sport and momentum in WBBL?
Yeah, there's lots of stuff happening there. I mean, the WBBL was at the forefront. It was the global leader, still is to a large degree from a World Women's Cricket League perspective. The WPL in India is become really big really quickly, and the Women's 100 is a great league as well. So they're the big three, leagues so we learn a lot from them, how they've been able to bring fans in and commercialise and have different models that we can learn from a cricket perspective. And then, there's been lots of really interesting case studies globally around primarily on the commercialisation of women's teams and leagues. And I think, we've got a big fan base. We've got big TV numbers for WBBL and lots of passionate fans. What we're continuing to have to look for and find ways to do, and I think it's true of most, if not all professional women's leagues around the world, is trying to convert that into a commercial engine, if you like. There's some really, really important growth we've had, but how do you turn a really popular big fan base into a commercialised league is an ongoing kind of consideration and piece of work for us.
Absolutely. And I think there's been different models around having different teams and team names, etc. Obviously, the BBL all have the same team names, and the AFLW as well. But you go over to the WNBA, it's the New York Liberty, not the New York Knicks women's team. So I'm curious to know, how much do you look on that sort of things as well?
Yeah, we're not as much on that, in the sense that, our view is that the Perth Scorchers men's, both the men's and the women's team get value from sharing the name. It has great equity in the Perth market, as do all our clubs. So it's less about the name and branding. I think it's more about making sure you put on high quality events and connect with the unique stories that inevitably our female athletes have. They're just the way into the sport, what the energy they bring to the game, the quality of play. We're so fortunate that in cricket, that the quality of play of the Australian team and the Australian players is the best, and it's they're phenomenal athletes that put on a great show. Our job is to make sure people know that and can come and see that. That's something that's really important to us.
Yeah, and we've just had a change in ownership of the WNBL. It'll be interesting to see how they go as well in regards to they've raised the minimum salary. They've got all these. They've announced the teams, etc. And they're different names to the main WNBL. But it'll be interesting to follow their progress from the new ownership. Would you be watching them a little bit closely too?
Yeah, there's no. What's fascinating is there's no right or wrong model. There's so many different models into that, whether it's different ownership, different branding, different seasons. We play our women's league at a different time of year to our men's league, whereas in the 100 in the UK, they basically play them at the same time. Both have strengths and both have some limitations there. So, it's still reasonably early days, isn't it, in terms of trying to convert great competition and great athletes into commercial, profitable kind of programs. So you can never assume you've got the right model. You have to always be challenging that and looking at it. We work with our clubs on a daily basis. So what's the right schedule for the WBBL? What's the right sort of campaign position? What's the right contracting model? And so it's feels like there's never one season that looks like the season before, because you have to change things and grow things and evolve things literally every year.
It sounds like a fun job, as you mentioned earlier. Now, we're going to touch on your own individual career, I suppose, in a second. The Scoreboard moment, it's a moment where it's something in your life which is sort of a bit of a sliding doors or an image or a time in your life, and you're like, this is something which has now changed the course of my life. What's your Scoreboard moment?
Yeah, I think you can assume that you're always going to put your kids and those things right at the top. If you take that as a given, I think on a personal level, with an aspiration to get into sport, walking into the Melbourne Footy Club, that is the team I followed and was my, you'd always dream there, and to be able to, the day that I got offered a job there after, I guess it was 2 or 3 months of work experience and volunteering and all those things, you kind of you get there and you look back, and that was a really important moment and such a great start to it.
Yeah, that's awesome. The other question I ask is the all-time favourite sporting moment, and now it may involve Melbourne. Now that I just think of it,
no, it's really hard. I was fortunate enough to start this job in July of 2019, and it wasn't that. It was only 6 months later the Women's World Cup final, the cricket final here at the MCG, 87,000 people. Before lockdown,
February 2020, wasn't it? I think it was.
Yeah, I reckon it was the first. The next day, I reckon there was a case that was kind of discovered in the what is now the Shane Warne stand the next day, and I was like, oh, this is getting a bit close to home. But it'd be hard to go past that. That's and what that represented, not just for Australian cricket, but for the opportunity for our best female athletes to play in front of those crowds. We've been aspiring to kind of get back there ever since, and COVID came at a really unfortunate time, clearly on every level, but in the context of the momentum that event had for women's cricket was really big. So to sit there and see that, sat there with my daughter, who was a young aspiring cricketer at the time, and to be able to watch that with her and be part of that, and then go down on the field and for a Katy Perry concert afterwards with her was pretty cool as well. So hard to go past that one, Chris.
Hard to go past that one, and we had previously the Matildas, which is awesome as well. There's been so many good sporting moments from a women's point of view recently as well. Now, I'm going to chuck in a new thing today. It's the 9th of May. It's a Friday. I'm feeling a little bit funky. So this is a thing called the Scoreboard Scramble, and I'm going to give you 10 seconds to get as many points as possible, and the maximum number of points you can get is 8. Right.
Okay.
And what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to say a name backwards, and there's 8 letters in that name. So I'm going to give you 10 seconds, and the name that you have to spell backwards is Ash Barty. Time starts now.
Crumbs. YTRABHSA.
Oh, time's up. I reckon I'm going to give it to you. I reckon you nailed it.
Huh? Gee, you did warn me about the scramble, but you didn't tell me that's what it was going to be. I
reckon we'll have to go back to the cameras on that one. The third umpire.
Go. Yeah, we can call for a review. I
One.
reckon might be umpire's call, and I reckon I got it.
I reckon you got umpire's call might have been umpire's. I'm going to give you the umpire's call because the answer 8 letters, and I've got it in front of me because I'm like no I can't do it in my head, and you just that BHSA right at the end, hey. And speaking of all time sporting moments, Ash Barty, it was Mel Jones's moment at Wimbledon as well, which is an unbelievable moment of her winning Wimbledon.
Ex-Brisbane Heat player as well, Chris, Ash Barty. That's what she's most known for.
Yeah, actually also played out of my local club at Wests as well, I believe as well. So a little bit of trivia there for you. One final question, Alistair, for the teenage boy or girl who may not have the sporting career but wants to work in sport. What's some advice that you can give them?
Well, that pretty much summarised me. I was mediocre at best at most things I tried, but love the mechanisms and the machinations that work behind sport, and probably preferred reading about the off-field than the on-field. I think, the advice is the obvious stuff. Get involved at a community level, volunteering. You get just as much experience being on the committee of your local cricket club or footy club as you do working in it. Ultimately, the way your local cricket club runs is not miles different to the way a Big Bash club runs. Getting the best players, keeping your fans happy, trying to make some money if you can. And so, I think the experience you get volunteering in a community sport, whichever sport you favour, I think not only helps you learn, but is great on your resume. It shows that you're committed. And that would be my, along with all other things, work hard, study, all the things that you would assume. But really the difference between community sport and elite sport is only just a couple of zeros, really. So you can learn a lot there.
That's a good way to put it. Alistair Dobson, Executive General Manager of the Big Bash Leagues at Cricket Australia. Thank you so much for being on Scoreboard and giving the listeners an insight to what makes the BBL tick, the innovation, the longevity of the game, all the data that goes into it. I wish you well in the future iterations of the Big Bash. We've got lots of a big season coming up, obviously you mentioned with the Ashes, and the coming years coming up with the Big Bash. Thank you so much for being part of Scoreboard.
Thanks, Tris. Thanks for having me.